Kia ora guys, I'm Michelle. In this video I want to talk to you about some lessons I learned on a river safety course just recently. Now it may surprise you to know that in New Zealand more people drown in unsafe river crossings than they do in any other outdoor activity in New Zealand. So just recently I decided that those statistics were weighed too much against me and decided to go and upskill myself on how to safely cross a river and just be around rivers in general. One of the main things I learned is that whenever you come to a river, before you decide to cross, you need to ask yourself 3 questions. The first of those questions is, do I need to cross at all? Quite frequently, people who are in that hiking mentality will often overlook things like a bridge a little way down or upstream, or even something that might aid them in actually getting across a river, like a large tree trunk or something like that. So the second question that you need to ask yourself if you do decide that you need to cross that river is, where do you cross? And when you're considering where you need to cross, you need to think about a couple of things. First and foremost is obviously your entry and exit points. You need to be thinking about things like, is there a steep bank in order to get down into the river, and is that going to be dangerous? Is it going to cause you to lose your footing and end up getting swept away by the river? And once you get down into the river, is there an easy access way to your exit point on the other side, or is your exit point a long way downstream and you're going to need to spend a lot of time in that river before you can even get out? You also want to think about run out. Now, run out means that if everything goes wrong and you end up getting swept away by the river, that you are still going to be able to exit the river a little further downstream, but still on the same bank that you are trying to cross from. And then lastly, you want to be thinking about using the current as your friend. As much as possible, you want to be making sure that you are working with the river instead of trying to fight the river. So one thing you never do is try to cross on an upstream angle. When you've considered where you're going to cross, you then also want to think about how you're going to cross. And this includes things like, if you're in a group, considering what the mentality and experience of your group is, considering what sort of clothing that you're wearing and whether you need to secure some of it down, and also considering what equipment you have, which is either going to help you or hinder you on your river crossing. So often, just stopping to think about those 3 questions can actually help you to make a better decision as to whether or not you do need to cross a river. And if you're in a group, you will need to make sure that all of the members of your group are involved in coming up with solutions and answers to those questions. Another really handy thing and tool that you can use to help you decide whether you need to cross a river is to use the BREEDS acronym. Now, this acronym will remind you of things that you need to consider before you decide to cross a river. So B stands for the bed. You need to check what is underneath the river. If you can't see the bottom, then probably it's not a good idea to cross. And similarly, if you can see the bottom and it looks like it's full of large, unstable, slippery rocks, you might want to try and find another area to cross. While we're on the subject of rocks, you absolutely do not want to be rock hopping unless you absolutely have to. You absolutely want to avoid rock hopping. Not only could that be the end of your hiking trip, but it could also be the start of a lot of other problems for you. So the second letter in our acronym is R, and R stands for run out, which I explained briefly before. Basically, you want to make sure that when you enter the river, even if everything goes wrong, you've still got an avenue of escape. If the river takes you away, you can still exit on the same side of the river that you are crossing from. The 2 E's stand for entry and exit, which again we've just discussed briefly. You want to make sure that you've got a safe and secure entry and exit from the river. D stands for depth. Don't be fooled by the depth of the river. Even if it looks like it's moving very slowly, a deep river can still put a lot of force on your body and make that river crossing very unsafe for you. A good thing to do is to check how fast it's flowing before you decide to cross. And you can do this by throwing a leaf or a stick into the river and then trying to walk alongside it at walking pace. If that leaf or stick is flowing faster than you can walk, it's probably unsafe to cross. But if you can walk faster or at the same speed as the leaf or stick is flowing, then crossing might be an okay idea. S stands for speed, and it sort of ties into the depth. Just remember that if a river is flowing twice as fast as it normally does, that's quadruple the force on your body. Do not underestimate the speed and depth of rivers. It's one of the number one things that most people in the outdoors underestimate, and what leads to a lot of accidents. Okay, so you have assessed your 3 questions either by yourself or in the group, and you've also used the BREEDS acronym to decide whether or not it is safe to cross. Some other things that you might want to think about are hazards along the river. Now, there are a lot of hazards to think about, and we can't go into all of them here, but I just wanted to mention some of the biggest ones so that you have an idea of what you're looking for. The first and probably most obvious thing to look out for is obstacles. Now, these could be anything from large rocks that are sticking out of the water to anything that is underneath the water that could impede your ability to cross. Other things to think about are what is known as strainers. Now, typically this might be something like a large overhanging tree with a lot of intertwined branches that sort of droop down into the river. If you're crossing upstream of a strainer, there's a real possibility that if you lose your footing, you're going to end up entwined in that strainer and not able to move, not able to extricate yourself, and in the worst case potentially you could end up drowning. So if at all possible, you want to make sure that you are crossing well downstream of any obstacles or strainers. You want to keep a lookout for the hydrology of that river as well. Now, hydrology is something that I didn't really even think to consider, but now I'm going to be paying an awful lot of attention to, and it actually starts at home before you even begin your hike. Now, a really good place to go for some information on the hydrology of the river that you're crossing is your local or regional council website. Quite often they will provide details of the flow rate, speed, depth of the water that you're planning to cross for a historical period before you even set out. Now, it's a good idea to check those things for the week prior to when you are deciding to cross that river. Included in the hydrology aspect, you also want to familiarize yourself with some of the key features of rivers, such as waterfalls, eddies, standing waves, buffer waves, this sort of thing. Just in summary, everybody knows what a waterfall is, so obviously you don't want to be crossing upstream of a waterfall in case you are carried over that fall and end up in the wave at the bottom getting stuck. Standing waves are a similar sort of thing where the water will travel over an obstacle and create a whirlpool, or basically a wave that comes back on over itself on the other side. And a buffer wave is actually on the upstream side of an obstacle, and it's the same sort of thing, buffers up against the obstacle and can create a recurring wave that once again you or somebody in your party could end up getting stuck against. Aside from that, some of the other things that you want to be thinking about when it comes to hazards are foot entrapment. Make sure that there's nothing there that you could potentially get your foot caught in. This is also especially the case if you're crossing a very rocky river. Sometimes your foot or your boot can get wedged down in between 2 large rocks, and that can either throw you off your feet or you could just end up getting your boot caught. And then the other big hazard around rivers that a lot of people forget about is hypothermia. This can include sort of being confused, it's all the umbles, the fumbles, the stumbles, the grumbles, that sort of thing. And don't forget as well that if somebody is hypothermic, quite often they might not look or feel cold. They might even start taking their clothes off. So if you can, get onto the internet, research hypothermia, and try to get yourself familiar with some of those symptoms. Okay, so you've asked your 3 questions and you run through the BREEZE acronym to see if it's safe to cross the river. You've also assessed any of the potential hazards that might be in that river. So the next thing that you are going to start to do is prepare yourself for the crossing. Now, preparation comes down to a few different things. First of all, your preparation most importantly must include assessing not only yourself but the members of your group. Now, this includes things like how you have been and how your group members have been up until that point. Is anybody tired? Is anybody uncomfortable? Is it potentially a situation where you've got members of your group that are just not comfortable going ahead and crossing this river? Secondly, you want to assess the level of experience of the group, and this is where if you're not confident and you haven't done river crossings before, it is very important that you speak up and let the other members of your group know. The other thing that you want to make sure you're doing to prepare yourself for a river crossing is to check your clothing. Now, probably the worst thing that you can do if you're planning to cross a river is have baggy items or loose items of clothing. So anything that's baggy, you want to make sure you tighten it right up, and that includes things like if you're wearing a rain jacket or a baggy jacket, that you cinch up your sleeves if you've got that option. It means closing up all your zippered pockets or any other pockets, making sure that all your zips are done up. If you can't adequately do that, then you need to take that jacket off and stow it away in your pack. The same applies to pants. If you've got rain pants or any other hiking pants on and they have zips, you want to make sure all of those zips are done up, and if you've got any Velcro or elastic that allows you to cinch those right the way down to your body, do that. Outside of your clothing, you also want to make sure that everything in and on your pack is secure as well. So if you've got any dangling items, you want to make sure you take them off and stow them away inside your pack. Do up any zippers or open items if you have the ability to do so. And tuck away any loose cords or anything like that that could potentially get in your way. You also want to think a little bit about what's actually inside or attached to your pack. For example, foam mattresses are not great to have on the bottom of your pack if you're crossing a river. You want to make sure that you have them sitting on the top, and that is all to do with your buoyancy if you are in the river. You'd be absolutely amazed at how buoyant a full pack can be when it's in the water. I mean, for example, a 30-litre pack can have up to 30 kilograms worth of buoyancy. So you might even find yourself stowing some rocks and things down inside your pack just to counteract that buoyancy a little bit. If your foam pad's on the bottom, obviously it's going to act as a rising agent, and it could end up pushing the pack out of the water and you by default, or flipping you over. And that also extends to having a think about what's in your pack that could also act as a buoyancy device, just in case you do need a little bit more lift. And it comes right down to even turning your billy cans or cook pots upside down so that you're able to make the most of the air that's trapped inside. Even though you've done all of that and you think that it's safe to cross, sometimes the worst can absolutely happen. So if you do need to perform a rescue for any reason, then you must remember going into the water after somebody should be your last resort. If somebody in your group needs rescuing after they get themselves into trouble on the water, there are 4 things that you should do. Firstly, you should yell out to them. See if they're able to get themselves out of the situation by themselves. Secondly is reach. So if you've got a long stick or a walking pole or a set of hiking poles that you can reach out to them so they can grab onto them and reel themselves in, that's your second option. 3 is throw. So if you are sensible enough and prepared enough to take a proper throw bag with you, that is the point at which you would throw that bag into the water so that they can grab the rope, and again you can reel them in. If you don't have a throw bag with you, you might be able to substitute something such as a piece of paracord with maybe a couple of knots on the end to give it some extra leverage to throw out into that water beyond the person that you're trying to rescue. But if not, then your 4th option is to go into the water and try to rescue them yourself. Okay, so that's all the theory covered. Now let's go and try some practical tools for how to cross the river. Okay, so now I've given you the information about how to check whether you need to cross the river. It's time to demonstrate how to actually cross if you do need to. So I'm going to be demonstrating 4 different methods of crossing rivers today. There's going to be 2 group methods and 2 solo methods. And one of those solo methods I'm not actually going to demonstrate because I don't want to get wet. So we're going to start off with the group crossings, and for this one I've got a volunteer demonstrator. This is my sister Tanya. She's quite kindly helped me to demonstrate today. So let's get started. Obviously now, if you can cross a river in a group, it's going to be much safer than trying to cross a river on your own. So if you can, you really want to be trying to team up with a couple of people. Ideally, group crossing should be 2 to 5 people. Any less than that, obviously you're crossing by yourself and that's not quite so safe, and any more than that you actually lose the communication down the line and it becomes a little bit less safe. So we're going to show you 2 group crossing methods. One is going to be the pack grab method, which is a method of group crossing where everybody is wearing their packs, and the second method is going to be what's called a clothing grab, and that's if for some reason you decide to cross the river without your pack on. Okay, so our first method is the pack grab method, okay, and so the first thing to do is make sure that you prepare yourself with your pack. Now I should say that for these group crossing methods and even indeed for your solo crossing method, the method of preparing yourself with your pack is going to be exactly the same. So the first thing is, if you have a hip belt, you want to make sure that that is absolutely as tight as you can possibly get it, especially if you're going to be doing a pack float down the river. The second thing that you need to make sure you do is take off your sternum strap. Now the reason we take it off is because if something goes wrong and you end up getting carried away down the river, or if your pack gets caught in a strangler, something like a tree, you want to make sure that you can get out of your pack really easily. Now if I were to get caught, all I'd have to do is locate my hip belt buckle, undo it, and then just wriggle out of my pack. Tanya's pack here doesn't have a hip belt, so she's basically just making sure that her sternum strap is completely open, so that if needs be she can just wriggle out of the pack. And then the third thing for group crossing methods is, and also for your solo crossing method too, is to loosen off your shoulder straps as much as possible. Now for group crossing, this is partly because we need to make sure there's enough room down the back of your pack, in between your pack and your back, for somebody's arm to go through, but also again it's just a lot easier for you to wriggle out of your pack if something happens if you've got looser shoulder straps. So you all nice and loosened off there?
I think so.
Perfect. Okay, so let's show you how you need to grab. Now you need to think about who the strongest and weakest people are in your group. Our river here is flowing in this direction, and we want to make sure that we have the weakest person downstream and the strongest person upstream. She's probably stronger than me actually, so we're going to switch places. And that means that I now am down at the downstream end, she's at the upstream end. Hopefully her legs are a little bit stronger than mine and she can take a little bit more of the brunt of that water as it hits her than I can. She's helping to protect me, but I'm also acting as a buttress for her, so that's perfect. Now let's move on to the actual method of the grab itself. Now the pack grab method, we basically want to go in behind and then grab onto the strap on the other side. So you just turn to one side, I'll show you to the camera. My hand here, because she's at the same height as me, is actually going underneath where her strap comes and then out through to the other side, and I'm grabbing onto her strap. You just turn around again, we'll just show them from the other side. So my hand is going through here and then I'm finding her strap on the other side and grabbing. And then I'm holding that position really tightly. Now Tanya's going to do the same thing with my pack. But just in case you've got people of differing heights in your group, there's a couple of different ways that you can battle that. If the person is taller than you, you're probably still going to be able to get your hand up through the same hole, but if not, just turn to the side again. If you can't quite go over the top of this shoulder strap, you can always come underneath and then grab onto the other side. And if the person is shorter than you, actually you can probably stay facing that way. But if they're shorter than you, basically your method is going to be to try and come over the top of their pack and then right the way down to grab the strap on the other side. A little bit difficult to demonstrate because you're the same height as me, but that's the idea there. Okay, so we're going to get ourselves ready. We're going to go in behind and we're going to grab, and Tanya's going to do the same thing with me.
Got it.
Locate my pack, she's got it, and we are going to hold on for dear life. Okay, so now we've got our packs grabbed, we're going to follow a few main rules as we cross the river. Now the first major rule obviously is don't let go of your shoulder strap. You must make sure you hold on to that at all times. The second main rule is to keep your hips glued to the person next to you. This provides additional stability and also it makes it a lot easier to just keep that same pace going. It helps with communication, all that sort of thing. The third main rule is your steps that you're taking. Now when you're crossing a river like this, you want to be taking small shuffling steps as much as possible. It's not always possible because some rivers have very, very rocky beds. But you want to keep your steps as close together as possible, and again that's a stability thing. If you go and take a big long step like this, all of a sudden you weaken the whole strength of the line. So that's why we take small shuffling steps. And the fourth rule for group crossings in particular is to make sure that you keep the communication down the line. Now it's a good idea to pick one person in the line to communicate with everybody and make the decisions. So just pick one person and then let that person guide the team across the river. Okay, so our second group crossing method is the clothing grab method. Now this is very, very similar to the pack grab method. It's just that we don't have a pack to be able to grab onto. So we're still going to be going behind the person and reaching around to their opposite side. You got it? Yep. And then we are reaching for that person's clothing. So if you just turn that way, so I've grabbed right onto her belt of her shorts here. And if we turn this way, you see she's got a real firm grip on my shorts here too. So again, this is how you keep your stability. You want to make sure that you do not let go of your grab on that clothing. Keep your hips together again and take your small shuffling steps as you cross the river. Okay, so you've gotten to a river that you need to cross and you're solo hiking and you don't have a group of people that you can practice one of the group methods of crossing with. If you do have to cross solo, again there's a few ways that you can make this safer for yourself. You want to prepare your pack just like we've demonstrated for the group crossing videos, and that is to have your hip belt as tight as possible, your sternum strap off, and your shoulder straps as loose as you can get them without compromising your safety. You also then want to make sure that you find yourself something to brace yourself against as you're crossing. Now you can find a very, very strong stick. Make sure that you put your full body weight on the stick and that it doesn't break when you've got your full body weight on it. If it breaks, then it's not a good stick to use. But most people these days are hiking with trekking poles, so you can actually do a river crossing with your trekking poles. The idea is that you want to brace your trekking poles into the upstream side of the river. There's no point bracing it into the downstream side of the river, because what happens is the water comes along, flowing in this direction, and all it does is kick this out from under you, and that's your support gone. If you brace your trekking poles in the upstream side of the river, the water is just buffeting up against this all the time and it can't very easily knock your trekking poles out. Now the rule is, if you are using trekking poles, you don't want to just use one by itself, because one by itself is a lot less strong than two together. And if you're using two together, you need to keep them together the whole time. So if you don't have one of those handy little clips, you want to make sure that you keep a tight grip and that you don't let them come apart at any stage. Now the method you're using when you're crossing is very, very simple, and basically it is pole, step, step, pole, step, step. You want to make sure you've got your poles anchored first and then you take your steps. It's no use sort of doing a pole and a step at once, because then you've got no anchor in the river and the current can end up carrying you away. Now your second solo method of crossing a river is going to be a pack float. I'm not going to demonstrate that today because I don't particularly want to get wet, but basically the rules for doing a pack float are to make sure that you have absolutely nothing hanging off the back of your pack. Any straps and things that you've got, you want to make sure are tucked in. Your trekking poles, if you can't stow them away inside your pack, you just want to shove them down on the side. Most of the packs these days have got straps on the side that you can cinch trekking poles to. And you're probably going to need to weigh your pack down somehow. So it might even be worth just sticking a couple of rocks in the pack if you can fit those in there. Otherwise you're going to find that your pack is going to start to ride up like this and probably topple over your head and is going to force you under the water. Okay, so your strategy if you're doing a pack float down the river obviously is going to be to figure out where your escape is from the river. I'm facing upstream at the moment and I don't really want to be facing upstream because I'm going to be, or I should be, floating downstream if I'm doing a river float. So angle yourself downstream. You've got your rocks in your pack to help you with the buoyancy, and then basically all you're going to do is get as far into the river as you possibly can, and then you're going to sit down into your pack and get the pack most of the way into the water before you fully commit to it. Now once you're in the river and you're lying on your pack and you are balanced well, the next method is to, or the next thing you want to think about is how you need to get to your exit river while you're pack floating is to angle your body partly into the current. So you want to basically be floating down the river on a diagonal angle. Okay, so here is the solo crossing method with poles. So we are traveling in the direction of the flow of the river. So the river's flowing this way. I'm going to use that to my advantage and try and cross on this sort of an angle. My poles are going into the upstream side of the river, anchoring them, and then I'm taking 2 steps. Okay, so here is the group crossing method with the clothing grab. So put Tanya, the strongest person, on the upstream side, I'm on the downstream side, and do you want to be in charge or shall I?
Maybe you do it.
I'll be in charge for this one then. So our hips are glued together, and we're going to again move in the direction of the flow of the water on a slight angle, but basically in a downstream direction. So we're going to start moving just short shuffling steps, okay? And you tell me if you've got any rocks or anything that you need to avoid.
Oh, there's a rock here.
Oh, okay, so shall we go to the left of the rock? Yep. Shuffle left. And we're good to carry on now?
Yeah.
Good. Perfect. Okay, and our last and final method of group crossing is the pack grab. So we've gotten ourselves all prepared, we've got the packs grabbed, hips are together, and now we can start moving again. I guess I'll be in charge again.
Yep.
And we're going to get going. So let's start off now. Small shuffling steps, hips together, and keep the communication open.
There's
The rock there,
Yep.
okay, so should we go to the left of the rock?
Yep.
Yep, we'll shuffle to the left. Small shuffling steps,
Hips together.
hips together. And we are there. Perfect. Okay, so I hope that really helped you to understand a little bit more and pick up a few safety tips on A, whether you need to even cross a river that you come across, and B, if you do, how best to do that. Thanks to Tanya for helping me out with this one, and I will catch you next time. Don't forget to go and check out my Facebook and Instagram pages. I've been posting a lot of stuff over there just recently about some things that I've been getting up to during the week. Okay guys, see you later.